Welcome to Practical Access. I'm Lisa Dieker.
And I'm Rebecca Hines. And Lisa, I know today we're speaking with someone that you've very recently worked with, who is an expert in two things I love. Who we have?
Yeah, so today we're excited to have with us Bree Jimenez, who is a professor in special ed and the chair of the Department of Ed Psych at Baylor. We're so excited to have you with us, Bree. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
So, Becky, you had two things you're excited about. I'm going to let you kick it off because I'm excited about a lot of things. Bree represents what we both love is that deep niche in our field.
Well, Bree, I love your topics because I know that particularly the population of students who have more difficulty in communication, maybe higher need students, if you will, that population so often is forced into one type of instruction. And I would love to hear a little bit about your approach to opening up a more inquiry-based learning opportunity for populations that sometimes get sidetracked.
Absolutely. It's funny, I kind of fell into this area because for so long I was working on general curriculum access for students with more significant disabilities. And by that, I mean students often with more moderate, severe intellectual disabilities, communication, sometimes students on autism spectrum, and with more complex communication needs. And we kept doing some great work in math and science, and we would get, really kind of deep into often, just even figuring out how to create access. But then, little by little, as we grow as researchers and educators and we learn, I kind of always believe the kids can do whatever it is that we figure out how to teach them. So it's usually has to do much more with us as the educators. But we kept getting into vocabulary, and then we started kind of creating access to text. And then we started creating access to, how to use explicit and systematic instruction for comprehension questions. But really kind of at the nuts and bolts of it all, we kept kind of jumping back into a lot of literacy skills and started looking at, in some of our early work, Ginevra Cortade, who I work with quite often now, her dissertation many moons ago was really looking at inquiry. And over the past, 15 years, we've kind of said, what does that actually mean for this group of kids, and what does that look like? And often have been pushing up against sometimes that false dichotomy of inquiry versus explicit instruction, which I don't believe that there's a verse. It's kind of a yes and type of situation.
I love that. I love that yes and I think one of the yes ands that schools struggle with, and this is true. I was just out in a school last week, and we were, looking at some beautiful students who had extensive support needs in communication and behavior, and really a real desire to put them in classes. And we were talking about science, and I think one of the questions that came up that I would love to get your expertise on is, what about the students that are in the group but don't understand a communication board or don't know how to communicate with a friend who doesn't speak in an inquiry-based? And, as you well know, in the elementary classroom, someone tends to take over for you, usually a little girl that says, oh, let me just do everything for you. And so what's some of your advice to schools and teachers that are like going, yeah, we want to do inquiry, but we're not sure how to do that when students have more extensive communication needs in the classroom and it's based?
So one of the things over the past couple of years that I've been really, really thinking about is this idea that, even within the next generation science standards, they actually, for just because terminology gets us in trouble often, and we say inquiry, and then there gets this, idea that it's this fixed set of steps. And, the next generation science standards will even talk about it as a practice. And, the word practice, it seems to work better with us because we don't have these false preconceived notions of what we did, where we were told, first you do this, then you do this. And I think one of the things with inquiry too is that we are we often see like over dependency on this idea that the way that we show what we know is through verbal responses. And that's what's so much fun about true, inquiry in a classroom is that we can show what we know and show what we want to do or show what we might want to try or respond in lots of different ways. And so one of the cool things is about like science and engineering and often, even within mathematics and STEM fields is thinking about all the ways that kids can do, and we can then start to look for consistencies. And I think the other kind of, hard part within that is this idea that it has to be open or nothing. And open inquiry is very different than guided inquiry. And well, I guess they're not totally different. It's this idea, and we do it already. And I think often, if we use words like scaffolding, often, our special educators and general educators could talk much more efficiently back and forth, where when we start to say prompting hierarchies or things like that are much more kind of driven within systematic instruction or explicit instruction, that sometimes our teams are not all fluent on, we're not speaking the same language. But when we really get down to the nuts and bolts, through, discussing what's going on in a classroom, everybody kind of starts to agree is that, yeah, we're not just going to throw it out and be like, just try anything, everybody. It's where we start to kind of give that a little bit of structure, and then we fade our supports over time, which we all agree is, a great way to look at this. So I think when it comes to communication, kind of going back to your question, is that when we start to kind of like figure that out of what are the key elements or the key things we really want to make sure kids understand or know or can communicate in a more structured way, I guess, we can start to figure out what are the response words or what are the questions or what are the yes, no responses or what are the things we just want kids to do. And I don't care if you explain to me. I just want you to do it. And as I start to see you thinking through or trying different materials, that's when I start to realize you keep going to the fuzzy things. And the fuzzy is the attribute that you could have raised your hand and said fuzzy, or you could have used your assistive technology. But instead, I just watched you build and you used those materials that were fuzzy. And now I'm starting to make those connections that you understand properties and you understand the attributes and you understand why you might be using those. And so kind of that overdependency of language can really get in the way, especially for kids with more extensive support needs.
So Bree, would you say that entry steps for teachers, does that start with the task analysis? Does that start with breaking things down and looking at these, these skills, all these things that people need to use, whatever approach or obtain whatever content? Where does somebody who's just wrapping their mind around this start?
Yeah. It's funny because I'm in a place right now with some of the research we're doing on engineering that's kind of got me rethinking a little bit of this. I think generally speaking, yeah, breaking steps down, but I think one of the first things that's really, really helpful is for a teacher to first think about the lesson it is that they're doing or the unit that they're going to teach, and then determine what are like the essential, kind of the essential things. What are the critical things that kids need to know or be able to do? And so I would say, thinking about, is there some math in here that's going to be really important? Or is it going to be important that I have supports in there? Because right now is not the time I want to do a 20-minute lesson on how to measure something. But it's going to be a big part of them understanding something is longer or shorter or, heavier or lighter in the concepts that they're going to build. And then I would start to think about, are there science concepts that need to be built into this lesson? And can I build them? And maybe they're earlier concepts. Like we did this whole unit on solar ovens. And in order to do that, I needed to understand temperature. But I was working with a bunch of students who didn't know how to measure temperature using a thermometer, didn't maybe even know that thermometer was the appropriate measurement tool. And so we specifically built these things into this, sixth grade lesson. So I think determining some of those kind of things. And then I think in the end, what is it that you care the kids get? Because if not, and you don't prioritize what some of those outcomes you actually want them to measure or the things that you're going to need to build in, and just prioritize a couple of those to make sure that we don't go down these weird rabbit holes where we're spending so much time on something that isn't even the essence of what that lesson or unit was supposed to be on. So I think that's a really, really big one. And then breaking down the steps and looking for routines that kids could use every single day, and they could be generic. What are the things they're going to need?
So if I could ask my final question, considering, your view of this process, one which I share, is this about skills at the end of the day? Is it about a student of any abilities access to the material, whether or not we can even evaluate how much of it he or she absorbs? Or do you think that there are required skills for people to participate in this type of learning?
I don't think there's prerequisites. Definitely don't think there's prerequisites. But I do think that we have to, in good measure, we are educators. It's not just about kids exploring and just playing. It's about kids going to school to gain skills. And I think that there are, I don't want to say levels because that sounds, kind of too hierarchical, but there are skills that we can build, and some kids are going to come with certain skills and some don't. And that is the same exact thing as any general education classroom, lesson, student. It doesn't matter. All of our students are gaining different skills at different levels. And I think one of the big aha moments, though, for me has been that it's the practices, it's the habits of mind, it's the this is where the metacognition kind of comes in. And this is the piece that is so exciting for me because I think it is the true tried value of special education and always has been, which is the self-determination, the communication, the initiation. But when we look at STEM education, there are so many opportunities to build all of these in, which makes the science and the math come alive in a very, very meaningful way for all students, whether or not they're digging deeper into their science and mathematics, understanding and concepts, they're building the skills. So I think like inquiry and engineering, they're similar, they're not the same, but they are such an exciting way for us to really think deeply about how to build the skills that are going to help our students continue to prosper and transition. And, my hopes are no data to support this yet, but it's the post-school outcomes. I think that there are direct relationships, there will be direct relationships we can map of post-school outcomes for students who have high quality opportunities to engage in good STEM education through inquiry and engineering practices.
Well, and that's, I mean, again, I think that, the mindset here is we all agree and some beautiful things you said. And I think one of the words that you said, and I really appreciate, was the word general ed teacher. So my last question for you is, Matt, and I'm a general ed teacher. Maybe I'm mature, career changer, didn't go to school with kids with extensive support needs. They weren't even in the building. I don't have any experience. And I'm a science teacher. And I don't know how to build a classroom culture, period. How do you suggest I think about maybe a couple of resources I would go to start to build not only this inclusive mindset for me, but more importantly, we know a good STEM classroom has a culture of scientists working together and exploring some of those cross-cutting standards. What would be some of your things you'd recommend to that new person who says, I want to do this, I just don't have a toolkit to do it, and I maybe don't have a special ed teacher in my building prepared to do this either. So I stand alone and say, yes, I'm ready, but where do I start to build that culture in my classroom to make sure everybody learns successfully?
Yeah. Um, so I think one of the superpowers is if you know the content you want to teach. That's one of the superpowers of our general educators, even when we have great collaborative teams, is that we can't all be everything. But what it is knowing exactly what it is that is the most important element, the essence of that lesson. And then from there, back mapping it and not trying to do everything all day long through every lesson for every learner. I think that's one of the, we have lofty goals and we put a lot of pressure on ourselves as educators, but we have to recognize, and so I kind of go back to universal design for learning, and the most I can dig in that, and I know sometimes that is, CAST is a great resource for this, but I think it is UDL, recognizing that UDL itself, it's a concept. It's an idea of how we and we use different vehicles to get there. It's this destination of creating more universally designed things. And so I think that's where, when I look at the essence, I look at the elements of exactly what it is that I want the student to get. So for example, I'm in a lesson and there's, the science concept I want them to get. But then there's also a couple of these skills, like being able to share my idea with the person next to me, which is a key element of group work, which is huge. And one of the staples of engineering education is being able to collaborate in groups and be able to share and compare and contrast. Well, if I could really work for a student to be able to recognize what I want and be able to share that with a partner and listen to my partner, that would be huge. So recognizing what are those skills you want, what is the content you want, and then those are the things that I put my time and my energy into. And I think, getting to know some of the supports within Universal Design for Learning that are kind of outlined, looking at the guidelines to get ideas of, oh, I already do this. Oh, this is something I could do. Or I think another support I would really think of, and maybe one that's underutilized, I think, systematically, is peer supports. And looking to see what are the peer supports and recognizing what do typical, peers also do. Because I think also sometimes when we think about students with disabilities, we set really high expectations, and sometimes they're higher than what we would even, ask of their peers without disabilities. So I think using peers, CAST, through the UDL guidelines would be another one. Everything kind of always leads me back to explicit and systematic instruction. It always goes back to that. How do we use our peers? We help them implement explicit and systematic instruction. How do we really think about setting up our classrooms to be more universally designed? Often it goes back to breaking down tasks for everyone, which is a form of, explicit instruction. So I think also looking at maybe high leverage practices, looking at some of those things that could really help us engage our students more systematically and give our students routines within the class, or all students routines, so that they can start to build their knowledge and their skills and the content within the routine. The routines are the natural thing of how we we ask questions. We do this all day long in routines, like, what am I going to eat for dinner tonight versus, what do I need to get prepared for the rest of the week, to what do I need to do during this inquiry lesson? So those routines are really big to build, and that allows our students, I think, to put the energy and time and brain power into learning the skills and implementing them, rather than learning a new routine every single day, or trying to figure out what it is that we're doing today that was so different than yesterday, but really that wasn't what you were trying to teach in the first place. And that can really overwhelm all of our students, I think, and allow us to kind of open up some of that opportunities for all students in a more universal way.
Yeah, and I love that. And thank you for, reminding us that it's both the content and the social skills that we're all trying to learn every day in life. And I think school is no different. So I love that summary for that general ed teacher. Well, we thank you for joining us. And if folks have questions for us, please send us a tweet at Access Practical or send us a question on our Facebook page. Thank you again, Bree. We really appreciate your expertise and the work you're doing in the field.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. It was great to talk with you.